Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Just Law on IQRA TV. I'm your host Ilyas Bulbulia and I'll be with you for the next hour. As our regular viewers are aware, on Just Law we discuss an area of law which is of interest to you, our viewers. And secondly, more importantly, this is a live show where you can call in and ask us any questions that you have on any aspect of English law. On this show, I will be able to advise on matters which are as diverse as and covering matters such as family matters, immigration matters, criminal matters, etc. So whatever your questions are relating to English law, you can pick up the phone and give us a ring on the number that appears at the bottom of your screen. We get a lot of calls on immigration matters, which is fantastic. So even if you've got queries which relate to that area and there's something there that's concerning you, just pick up the phone and give us a ring and I should be able to advise you on that. A couple of minor points before we get going. Obviously it's a live show, so I'm not able to look at documents live on air. If it transpires that before I can advise you I need to look at your documents, then if you leave your number with the control room and I will call you back and I can look at your documents, arrange to look at your documents and to call you off when we've finished the show. Secondly, obviously because it's a live show, I'm not going to be able to take very detailed information from you. Again, if it transpires that I need an in-depth conversation with you before I can advise you, again, I'll ask you to leave your number with the control room and then I'll call you back and we can have that more in-depth conversation later on. So hopefully I should be able to advise you on most aspects that you call in about. If there's a problem and I need to look at documents or I need to have a more in-depth conversation, we can make arrangements for that as well. So whatever the questions are, whatever queries or concerns that you have in relation to English legal matters, all you need to do is pick up the phone and give us a ring and hopefully I should be able to provide you some advice in relation to that. Now, as our regular viewers are aware, over the last few weeks we've looked at various aspects of immigration law, and the reason for that is that we get a lot of queries in relation to that, and a lot of people who watch the show have if not problems with immigration matters, or they have queries relating to immigration matters, and they can be as diverse as how to sponsor their partners to come to the United Kingdom, or it could be how to sponsor their relatives to come to the United Kingdom on a visit visa. Or it could be that they've got somebody here that's related to them and they've got immigration problems and they want a second opinion in relation to that. So over the last few months after Ramadan, we went through various topics. We've looked at how to make spouse applications, how to make extension applications, how to apply for indefinite leave, etc. And today what I want to do is look at one of the more popular topics that we deal with on this show, which is how to make a successful spouse application. And the reason for that, reason for looking at this again, is that this is one area where we get numerous calls, and even in practice at work, this is something that really does keep us busy. A lot of the clients that we have in, a lot of the concerns that people have relate to how you get your husband or wife sponsored and into the United Kingdom so that you can stay with them. So a vast amount of our work on a daily basis actually covers this area, and in terms of the calls that we get, the vast majority of the calls that we get do relate to spouse applications. There was a time pre-2012 when this was a relatively easy area of law. All you had to do was demonstrate that you had sufficient income to be able to look after your husband or wife when they come to the United Kingdom, and you had adequate accommodation to be able to live with them, and there wouldn't be overcrowding. So the sort of rules that needed to be satisfied, they basically, if you look at a page full of text, the rules would be dealt with within a page and a half. Now the rules are significantly more complex, and even the rules and the guidance put together, I suspect, runs into hundreds of pages. You have separate guidance for the English language requirements, separate guidance for income, separate guidance for accommodation, and then you've got the actual rules, etc. If you put it all together, the rules and the guidance runs into literally hundreds of pages, and that's a huge difference from how this area of law used to be a few years ago, certainly about 5-6 years ago. So I think that is the reason why it generates so many queries, not just on a day-to-day basis at work, but also on this show as well. So I want to look at again how somebody makes a successful application for their husband or wife to join them in the United Kingdom. Now, let's look at the sort of have a broad overview of what the Home Office actually wants you to provide, or the areas that they look at when you make an application for your husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom. Obviously, they want to know by looking at documentary evidence that your marriage is valid. So there's these issues about validity of marriage and issues surrounding that. Obviously, they want to look at your status. Are you able to sponsor somebody to come to the United Kingdom? And then the area which generates the most queries, which relates to income. The Home Office wants to be satisfied that the income requirements are met, so that the idea behind that is when somebody comes from abroad to the United Kingdom, when they join their husband or wife in the United Kingdom, there's no recourse to public funds. Another area that they look at is to make sure, like before, that there is adequate accommodation for the husband or wife who's coming to the United Kingdom. And then I think finally what they want to look at is that this marriage that's taken place, is it genuine and subsisting? So from a paper form perspective, it may well be a valid marriage, but that's not what they're looking at. The additional requirement that they're looking at is whether this marriage is genuine. So there's no sham marriage here, there's no marriage of convenience. And since the marriage was entered into, the relationship is still subsisting. So you can understand that where the parties have been married, let's say for 2-3 years, they want to make sure that, this is obviously to begin with, it was a genuine marriage, but that marriage, has it continued? Is the relationship still there? So broadly speaking, these are the sort of various areas that they're looking at. The validity of the marriage, the status of the person here who's sponsoring somebody to come to the United Kingdom, maintenance requirement, accommodation requirements, the genuineness of the marriage and whether the marriage is subsisting or not, has the person passed their English test, etc. So broadly speaking, there are these 7-8 areas that you need to look at. And each of these areas themselves have specific rules. And what I want to do today on the show is look at the specific rules which need to be met in order to sponsor somebody to come to the United Kingdom. Let's look at some of the more basic stuff, to begin with. What does the husband or wife who's abroad, whether it's India, Pakistan, etc., what do they need to do? Let's look at that and then look at what the sponsor in the United Kingdom needs to do. So what is it that the person who is abroad in India, Pakistan, etc., Bangladesh, wherever it is, what do they need to do themselves? But there are two key things that they need to do. And to some extent, this is something that they're going to have to do independently, and it doesn't really concern the sponsor in the sense that they're going to have to do it themselves. One is that they will need to pass the English test. Now, previously there was no requirement for an English test, but there is a requirement now. They must pass an English test. And it's not any test that needs to be completed, and it's not any test certificate which is acceptable. The Home Office is very specific in terms of the test that needs to be that the applicant needs to sit and pass. So you have to make sure, the husband or wife who's abroad have to make sure they sit the correct test and they pass it. Generally speaking, the test that needs the certificate that you need relates to a test which is called A1 Life Skills. Now, in my experience, most people do manage to pass that test. Even if somebody has little or no knowledge of English, in my experience, if they go on a course lasting 2 to 3 months, they would acquire sufficient knowledge of the English language to be able to pass the test. To some extent, it's not difficult because the test is the lowest test available to test one's English speaking and listening ability. So it's not what students pass, which is at a much higher level. It's not what those who are coming to the UK to work would pass, which is again at a higher level. This is at the most lowest level possible. So it's not, in this day and age, very difficult for people to pass that test. And as I mentioned, this is a test which only relates to checking or testing the husband or wife's speaking and listening ability in English. So it doesn't cover reading and writing. So it's at the lowest level, and it only tests two components, speaking and listening, and not reading or writing. And to some extent that does make it easier, because if you think about it, where somebody has to actually write in English, they would find that more of a struggle than being able to speak and listen. So that's where we are. It's not a difficult requirement to meet, and in my experience, vast majority of those coming from abroad do manage to pass that requirement. So that's the key requirement in terms of what the person abroad, the applicant, needs to do. What's the other main requirement that they need to satisfy themselves without really any input from the sponsor? Well, the other requirement is that they need to obtain a TB or a medical certificate. And that's a requirement that applies to a number of countries. Certainly applies to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. There are exceptions to that, but on the whole, in my experience, it does apply to the majority of countries, where it's a simple TB test that's done. But again, in the same way you had specific English certificates that need to be obtained, specific tests which need to be passed, in the same way with the TB and the medical requirement, there are only certain certificates from certain hospitals or clinics that the Home Office will accept. So basically, you need to be very clear about where you obtain these documents from. Now, what I've just outlined is, I would say, the general rule. There are exceptions, there are circumstances where somebody doesn't need to pass the English test. For example, if they're 65 or over, or they have a degree from the United Kingdom, or even a degree from abroad, which is comparable to a UK degree, and they can demonstrate that it's been taught in English. So, or they are unwell and their illness is such that they are unable to pass the test. So although I've outlined what the general rule is, there are exceptions to the general rule. So you must also bear that in mind where somebody is struggling to pass the test, to see whether they fall within the exemption or not. And even where you've got the exemption, let's say, for example, where there are medical reasons why somebody can't pass the test, again, there are certain documents which need to be submitted to be able to fall within that exemption as well. And moving on to the slightly more simpler requirement relating to the TB or the medical test certificate. As far as that's concerned, yes, generally speaking, that does have to be done. But again, there are some exemptions for that. Certain countries are exempt. If you've been living in certain countries, you may be exempt for a while, even if you've moved to another country. So the various rules which govern even these simple requirements relating to English and the TB or the medical certificate. And that's something that the applicant, the husband or wife in their home country, they need to meet that requirement themselves. The majority of the other documents don't need to be, or requirements don't need to be satisfied solely by the applicant themselves. So if we then move on to the next requirement, logically speaking, let's say the applicant can get the English certificate, can get the TB certificate. Obviously, we then need to make sure that the person in the United Kingdom need to check their status. Are they in a position to be able to sponsor a husband or a wife to come to the United Kingdom for settlement? Because there are you have to fall within certain categories to be able to do that. In general terms, the person in the United Kingdom who wants their husband or wife to come here either has to be a British citizen, or they need to have indefinite leave to remain, or they've got refugee status in the United Kingdom. It's important that you check and make sure that you are eligible to sponsor your husband or wife in the United Kingdom. For example, let's say somebody has previously been married here, they've divorced, they're originally from abroad, and they haven't obtained their indefinite leave, let alone nationality. They don't even have indefinite leave at the moment. They would not be able to sponsor their husband or wife in the United Kingdom. Let's say they only have limited a visa to be in the United Kingdom. They wouldn't be able to sponsor their husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom for settlement purposes. They might fit into some other rules. They may be here on a work permit, they may be here as a student, they may fit into some other rules, but in terms of the general, your typical spouse application where you want them to come and settle in the United Kingdom, they would not be able to do that. So it's important to make sure your status in the United Kingdom is such that it does allow you to sponsor your husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom. So they're quite simple points. Applicant, make sure that the English requirement is met, the medical requirement is met, make sure that the sponsor in the United Kingdom, their status is such that they can sponsor somebody to come to the United Kingdom. They're sort of the preliminary sort of easy matters, easy points that need to be fulfilled. Once you've done that, let's move on to what you then look at, which is that you have two options when you apply. You can apply on the basis that a marriage has taken place, or you can apply on the basis that you'll come to the United Kingdom, join your husband or wife in the United Kingdom, and then after you've come here, you will register your marriage here in the United Kingdom and then make a further application. So there's a marriage application or there's a fiancé application that can be made from abroad. In my experience, the vast majority of the people who come here tend to make an application based on the marriage that's taken place abroad. A couple of key points you need to remember on that. That if you enter into a marriage abroad, you have to comply with the requirements of the country where you are getting married so that your marriage is legal in that country. Pakistan, you normally have a nikah, which is then registered. Fantastic, not a problem. Let's take, for example, India, where somebody gets married in India and they have an Islamic marriage. So they have a marriage in a masjid, in a mosque. They get a certificate from the mosque confirming that they have married. Now, as far as Indian law is concerned, that in itself is not sufficient. Used to be sufficient many years ago, no longer is sufficient. To comply with the law for marriages in India, that marriage that's taken place in a mosque still has to be registered with the registrar. So the point I was making is that it's not sufficient that you've had your marriage under Islamic law, it still has to comply with the laws of that country. So whatever registration process you need to go through, in Pakistan it may be that you need to register with the Union Council or with the Tehsil Mufti office, or in India you need to register your Islamic marriage with the registrar. Whatever it is, you need to fulfill those requirements for your marriage to be valid. The other point that you need to bear in mind as far as marriages is concerned is that as far as English law is concerned, you need to be free to be able to enter into that marriage. So if you've previously been married, you need to make sure that that previous marriage has been brought to an end, and again it's been brought to an end in a proper legal manner. So for example, somebody is married properly in the United Kingdom. It's not sufficient to give a talaq and say, look, I've been to Sharia Council, I've got a divorce certificate, therefore my marriage has now come to an end. The requirements within the United Kingdom obviously is that as far as divorce is concerned, you have to obtain a divorce from a county court. So that process has to be followed. and that process has to be followed before the marriage abroad is entered into. So you have to be properly divorced before you enter into an Islamic into the second marriage. Let's take our call before we look into this further. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
जी वालेकुम सलाम जी, thank you for calling. जी
Can I talk to you in Urdu? Is that possible?
जी उर्दू में भी ठीक है जी, बात कर सकते हैं जी.
अच्छा, मैं 2016 में स्टूडेंट वीजा पे आया था
जी ठीक है, ओके जी.
और मेरा जो स्टूडेंट वीजा है वो एक्सपायर हो रहा है दिसंबर 31 को.
ऑलराइट, ओके, ऑलराइट जी, ठीक है, ओके.
तो मेरा भी कोर्स जो है वो 1 साल और है.
जी ठीक है, ओके.
तो कुछ ऐसा हो सकता है कि मैं अपना वीजा एक्सटेंड करवा सकता हूँ या मेरे पास कोई अपॉर्चुनिटी है?
जी ठीक है. और अगर आपको एक्सटेंड करना है तो आपको यहाँ वो यूनिवर्सिटी आपको स्पॉन्सर करने के लिए तैयार है?
ये मैंने अभी उनसे पूछा नहीं है, पर मेरा एक फ्रेंड है, उसने यूनिवर्सिटी से लेटर लिया था और वो होम ऑफिस भेजा है.
जी ठीक है.
और उसको भी 3 से 4 महीने हो गए, उसको कोई जवाब नहीं मिला.
जी जी ठीक है, ऑलराइट, ओके. चलो, जज़ाकल्लाह, थैंक यू वेरी मच, आपने कॉल किया. I'll answer that question for you. Now, basically speaking कि अगर आपको आपके पास वीज़ा है, फर्स्ट रिक्वायरमेंट ये है कि यू मस्ट अप्लाई. आपकी वीज़ा जो फिनिश होगी इससे पहले आपको अप्लाई करना पड़ेगा. दैट्स द फर्स्ट रिक्वायरमेंट. सेकंड रिक्वायरमेंट ये है कि आपको यूनिवर्सिटी को आपको सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ स्पॉन्सरशिप देनी पड़ेगी. सो दैट्स फाइन. अगर आपका टाइम यहाँ इज़ ओनली बीन 2.5 to 3 years, तो आपको एक एक्सटेंशन मिल जाएगा. सो यू शुड बी एबल टू एक्सटेंड. मगर इसमें यह है कि आपकी जो वीज़ा फिनिश होगी इससे पहले आपको अप्लाई करना पड़ेगा एंड यूनिवर्सिटी से सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ स्पॉन्सरशिप जो है वो लेनी पड़ेगी कि आपको यूनिवर्सिटी स्पॉन्सर कर रही है ये कोर्स के लिए. फिर एक और रिक्वायरमेंट है कि आपके पास सफिशिएंट सेविंग्स होने चाहिए बैंक अकाउंट में. तो अगर आप अप्लाई कर लेंगे इन टाइम तो होपफुली यू शुड बी ओके. बिकॉज अभी उसने क्या किया कि पहले ये था कि स्टूडेंट्स कंटिन्यूसली एक्सटेंड करते रहते थे उसकी वीज़ा को. तो एक स्टूडेंट की वीज़ा फिनिश हो गई, देन नेक्स्ट स्टूडेंट की वीज़ा के लिए अप्लाई करते थे. इसमें कोई टाइम लिमिट नहीं थी, यू कैन कंटिन्यू अप्लाइंग. अभी उसने क्या किया कि टाइम लिमिट डाल दी है, मगर तब भी यू हैव इनफ टाइम. अगर आप यहाँ एक कोर्स कंप्लीट कर लिया, यूनिवर्सिटी ने आपको सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ स्पॉन्सरशिप दे दिया, तो फॉर 1 additional year इट शुडंट बी ए प्रॉब्लम. You should be able to extend for 1 year. There should be sufficient time for you to be able to do that. ये जो time का जो restriction है, you haven't reached that yet, so it shouldn't be a problem if you do that. But hopefully that answers your question. If you're not sure, आप दोबारा phone कर ले, no problem. हम इसको we'll look at that in greater detail. So just looking at the spouse applications again, and what I was looking at was marriages and how the marriage needs to be legal. And one of the things that you need to make sure is where somebody has been married before, you need to make sure that that relationship has been brought to an end formally. So the divorce has taken place formally, and then after that, once it's taken place formally, you're free to marry. The Home Office will then accept the second marriage that you enter into. If there is a problem with your previous divorce or previous separation, in that it hasn't been done formally in accordance with the law in the UK, for example, then even though you may go abroad and get married legally, the Home Office will still have an issue because the first marriage has not been brought to an end. So you just need to be very careful. So we're going to take a short break, but after that, when we come back, we'll look at the more sort of important requirements relating to income, relating to accommodation, and relating to the relationship, and how we demonstrate that the income requirement is met, how we demonstrate the accommodation requirement is met, and how we demonstrate that the marriage is genuine and subsisting. So we'll be taking a short break. Inshallah, we'll be back in the next few minutes, and I'll look at that in greater detail then.